In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, October 20th, here in South Korea. A US Navy warship in the Red Sea takes down missiles fired from Yemen that are strongly believed to have been heading for targets in Israel, as civilians in southern Gaza wait desperately for the flow of essential aid from Egypt's side of the Rafah crossing, expected to begin this weekend. And President Yoon embarks on a 5-day state visit to Saudi Arabia and Qatar tomorrow, that is Saturday, to counter the potential broader economic repercussions of the fresh fighting in the Middle East amid diplomatic efforts to contain the rampant violence from spreading. Meanwhile, across the border in North Korea, Kim Jong-un meets with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Pyongyang in line with follow-up efforts on agreements reached during his summit with his Russian host Vladimir Putin last month. We start in the Middle East, where a US Navy warship reportedly shot down missiles launched from Yemen, most likely headed for Israel. As such, efforts to contain the conflict continue amid hopes for the flow of basic humanitarian aid from Egypt to southern Gaza starting this weekend. Our Lee Soo-jin has the latest.
Fears grow that the fighting between Israel and Hamas could escalate into a wider geopolitical conflict. The Pentagon said on Thursday local time that a U.S. Navy ship in the Red Sea shot down 3 land attack cruise missiles as well as several drones that had been launched from Yemen. According to the Pentagon spokesperson, the missiles and drones were fired by Iranian-backed Houthi militants in Yemen, potentially towards targets in Israel.
Information about these engagements is still being processed. We cannot say for certain what these missiles and drones were targeting, but they were launched from Yemen, heading north along the Red Sea, potentially towards targets in Israel.
Although it was previously reported that the Rafah border crossing, currently the only route for aid to enter Gaza from outside of Israel, would be opened from the Egyptian side to deliver humanitarian aid on Friday, this now seems uncertain due to concerns about road repairs and making sure the deliveries can be sustained. U.S. officials still say, however, that the first convoy of aid will take place this weekend. More than 150 trucks with food, water, and fuel are waiting at the border crossing. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant alluded to a ground assault in the near future. He told troops gathered at the Gaza border on Thursday that while they're now looking at Gaza from afar, an order will soon come that will allow them to see the Palestinian enclave from the inside. Fears over civilian deaths continue to mount, with reports on Thursday saying several people who had taken shelter at a church compound in the Gaza have been killed or injured in a blast. Since the Hamas militant attack on Israel on October 7, the number of deaths in the conflict has reportedly reached over 5,000. The Palestinian Health Ministry based in Gaza reported that Israel's retaliation to the Hamas attack has left at least 3,785 Palestinians dead in Gaza, of which around a quarter were children, while the UN Office for the Coordination of Human Affairs said the death toll in Israel stood at 1,400 as of Thursday. With this, many nations and international organizations are calling for a ceasefire to prevent the humanitarian crisis from further escalating. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., President Joe Biden addressed the nation in a rare primetime speech from the Oval Office on Thursday local time, sharing tangible support for a substantial security package worth billions of U.S. dollars in military aid to both Israel and Ukraine. President Biden linked support and stability in the two countries to America's national security amid rampant threats against its interests in recent times. He also called on Congress to keep the flow of weapons to Ukraine uninterrupted to ensure its protection against Russian invasion. With regard to Israel, he also vowed full support but cautioned the country from being blinded by rage. And in line with efforts to better address the fresh violence in the Middle East and its potential economic consequences, President Yoon is heading to Saudi Arabia and Qatar tomorrow, that is Saturday, for a 5-day state visit. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young covers his agenda.
President Yoon will seek broader economic ties with Saudi Arabia and Qatar and discuss efforts for regional stability amid the Israeli-Hamas conflict as he becomes the first Korean leader to make an official state visit to Riyadh and Doha. Yoon's office said the President and First Lady Kim Gon-hee will head to Saudi Arabia on Saturday for a 4-day stay. His official schedule begins Sunday with a bilateral summit and luncheon with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, followed by an investment forum with over 300 Korean and Saudi firms. Yoon will also visit academic institutions to promote further cooperation in the private sector and people-to-people exchanges, and commemorate 50 years of Korea and Saudi cooperation in the construction sector. The South Korean leader will head to Doha on Tuesday and drop by the International Horticultural Exposition before holding bilateral talks on Wednesday with Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. He'll then attend the Korea-Qatar Business Forum before visiting the country's education city. As Yoon's 6-day trip to the Middle East comes amid concerns that the Israeli-Hamas conflict could result in broader clashes in the Gulf region. Yoon's Deputy National Security Advisor said regional security will be high on the agenda during Yoon's summits with the Saudi and Qatari leaders.
Through this trip, we hope to strengthen practical cooperation with Saudi Arabia and Qatar, while also discussing ways to achieve peace in the Middle East and strengthen our own security. The trip is also meaningful in that, as a global pivotal state, South Korea will contribute to discussions on challenges facing the international community.
Also amid concerns of North Korea cooperating with actors like Hamas, Iran and Russia, a senior Yoon official said the president could well raise the issue in this bilateral summit, as Ho seeks greater support in clamping down on Pyongyang's illegal weapons cooperation and evasion of global sanctions. More than anything, the key feature of Yoon's trip will be his economic diplomacy drive, expanding the scope of bilateral business relations from energy and construction to diverse new industries.
38% of our crude oil imports and 21% of our gas imports come from both those countries. As Saudi Arabia and Qatar prepare for the post-oil era, it's time for us to explore new partnerships. More than 70% of the economic delegation will be small and medium-sized companies whose industries are diverse, covering energy and construction, as well as digital, finance, medical and cultural content.
The president will be accompanied by 130 Korean corporate chiefs, including the leaders of Samsung, Hyundai Motor and Hana, to Saudi Arabia, and nearly 60 business leaders to Qatar. This comes as South Korean construction and shipbuilding firms look to procure big contracts in constructing Saudi's Neom megacity and building LNG carriers for Qatar. Beyond business ties, the top office says Seoul will also look to increase cooperation and exchanges in education, culture and tourism as the countries forge future-oriented relations going forward. 오수영, Arirang News.
Also on the local front, a strategic U.S. bomber landed on South Korean soil for the first time to commemorate a defense show currently underway here in the country. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung has more on this symbolic gesture amid regional tensions.
The United States nuclear-capable bomber, the B-52, landed in South Korea on Tuesday at an airbase in the city of Cheongju. It was the bomber's first ever landing at a Korean airbase and did so after flying over Seoul Air Base at the opening ceremony of ADEX, or the Seoul International Aerospace and Defense Exhibition 2023. The bomber had previously been deployed over the Korean peninsula for joint air drills, but had never before landed on Korean soil. Speaking to the press on Thursday, the U.S. Air Force explained that it was proud to be able to participate in the event to demonstrate U.S. commitment.
This B-52 mission is part of our overall support to the air show, the Seoul ADEX, but it is part of our demonstration to the Republic of Korea and its people and its government that we stand by our allies, that we have an ironclad commitment to secure the peace and stability of this region. That is incredibly important to us.
The U.S. Air Force also highlighted the strengths of the B-52.
We have various mission sets such as strategic attack, air interdiction, close air support, and obviously we also support the nuclear enterprise. So we are very flexible, and I think the unique thing about the B-52 is the fact that we can support so many different mission sets.
On the same day, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Kim Seung-yeom was given a tour of the B-52 bomber. Kim emphasized that the deployment of the strategic bomber demonstrates Washington's will and ability to fulfill its ironclad defense and extended deterrence commitments on the Korean peninsula amid heightened nuclear threats from North Korea. The Joint Chiefs of Staff stressed that it is also part of U.S. efforts to increase the regular visibility of strategic assets on the peninsula. The bomber conducted a combined air exercise with South Korea's F-35A fighters on Tuesday. and it is also expected to take part in the first ever joint air drills between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan this weekend. Choi Min-jang, Arirang News.
And Defense Minister Shin Won-sik and his U.S. counterpart Lloyd Austin have reaffirmed their commitment to the Seoul-Washington alliance and discussed ways to expand the scope of their cooperation. In a phone call earlier on this Friday morning, the two defense leaders emphasized the importance of maintaining a strong combined defense posture to respond to North Korea's nuclear provocations and agreed to communicate frequently on key regional security matters. The call is the first between the two officials since Shin's recent appointment as defense minister. Come next month, that is November, Shin and Austin are poised to meet at the Security Consultative Meeting and the ROK UN Command Member States Defense Ministerial Meeting. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is in Pyongyang as part of follow-up efforts on agreements reached during summit talks between North Korea's Kim Jong-un and his Russian host Vladimir Putin that took place last month. Our Jong-un reports.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Pyongyang on Thursday in an effort to deepen bilateral ties amid U.S. accusations of arms deals between the two countries. According to the regime state media on Friday, Kim Jong-un used the talks to establish a long-term plan for the new era of stable and future-oriented relations. This comes roughly a month after Kim Jong-un traveled to Russia for a rare summit with President Vladimir Putin, with the two sides seemingly speeding up the implementation of follow-up measures to that meeting. Some details were mentioned during Lavrov's meeting with North Korea's Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee on Wednesday. They include ramping up trade and economic cooperation, resuming political dialogue with full-scale contacts, and possibly laying out foundations for Putin's reciprocal visit to Pyongyang. Also on the agenda was shared concern over, quote, increasing military activity on the Korean peninsula by South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, as well as Washington's deployment of strategic assets in South Korea. And North Korea's support for Russia's war in Ukraine, which Moscow claims is an effort to repel Western aggression, was also discussed. This comes just days after the White House accused North Korea of shipping arms to Russia, citing American intelligence tracking 1,000 containers of what was described as military equipment and munitions. The U.S. State Department once again reaffirmed their stance, vowing all possible measures to hold Russia and North Korea accountable for the arms deal, which will be a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Jong-un, Arirang News.
In other news, U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell believes American inflation remains high and that his committee is, quote, proceeding carefully ahead of the next Federal Open Market Committee that starts at the end of this month. Our Ising-jae reports.
Speaking at the Economic Club of New York on Thursday, U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said inflation in the U.S. is still too high, and in order to bring it down to the central bank's target of 2%, it will likely require a slower growing economy and job market. Powell says although inflation has cooled significantly compared to a year ago, the economy is growing faster than the Fed had expected and could continue to keep inflation high. According to the U.S. Fed chair, in order to reach the target inflation of 2%, it will likely require a period of below-trend growth and some further softening in labor market conditions. Still, Powell refrained from commenting on the central bank pushing for higher interest rates to further ease inflation, instead saying that he and the policymakers will continue to analyze data to make their decisions.
Given the uncertainties and risks, and given how far we've come, the committee is proceeding carefully. We will make decisions about the extent of additional policy firming and how long policy will remain restrictive based on the totality of the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks.
Meanwhile, amid the prolonged war in Ukraine and ongoing armed conflict between Israel and Hamas, Powell says geopolitical tensions pose risks to global economic activity, adding that economic implications remain highly uncertain. Powell also called the attack on Israel and the prospect of more lives lost horrifying. Ising-jae, Arirang News.
And U.S. Treasury yields responded to the latest remarks by the U.S. Federal Reserve by hitting their highest since 2007. According to Reuters on Thursday local time, the benchmark 10-year Treasury yield surpassed the 5% mark for the first time in 16 years. All three major U.S. stocks surrendered as risk-averse investors sought safe haven assets, with the S&P 500 tumbling by 7%. Europe's stern action against emission through the carbon border adjustment mechanism is shedding fresh light on corporate Korea's-related preparations, especially among its export companies. Our Moon Hye-ryan explains.
The transitional period before the full implementation of CBAM for countries exporting goods to the EU, including South Korea, began this month. CBAM is a measure aimed at preventing what's called carbon leakage, when a company moves its production facilities from a country with strict carbon emission policies to one with more lax policies. With CBAM, production facilities based outside of the EU will have to pay the same amount for their carbon emissions as sites within the bloc using the original emissions trading system. From the beginning of this month up until the end of 2025, only greenhouse gas emissions need to be reported without needing to make any financial payments. But from 2026, importers will need to declare the quantity of goods being brought into the EU in the preceding year, as well as what's called their embedded greenhouse gas emissions, which are greenhouse gas emissions generated during the production and transportation of goods. They will then have to surrender the relevant number of CBAM certificates priced at the weekly average auction price of EU ETS allowances. The South Korean government estimates that roughly 140 domestic companies will be affected as producers of what the EU defines carbon-intensive goods: cement, iron, steel and aluminium, fertilizers, electricity and hydrogen. Steel and aluminium exports are predicted to drop by more than 1/5 because a survey showed that more than half of South Korean companies who exported goods to the EU and plan to do so in the future do not have any plans in place for CBAM. An industry insider said that the reason behind this is because SMEs don't have the capacity to prepare for new situations like this, and the EU has not yet released detailed guidelines.
Another reason is that there are a lot of companies that lack knowledge or capacity for an organized MRV system.
MRV stands for Measure, Report, Verify, and is a basic tool to report carbon emissions. The government plans to provide funding to SMEs so they can implement it and expand consulting for employees about MRV. In addition to forming a dedicated task force, local companies can use the current domestic emission calculation system to report to the EU until the end of 2025. In an emergency economic meeting earlier this week, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho outlined some solutions going forward.
We will consult with the EU to recognise domestic emissions costs. In addition, we will actively support technology development and facility investment to reduce carbon emissions for export items to the EU, such as hydrogen-reduced steel.
The government also plans to open further negotiations with the Taxation and Customs Union of the EU next month. Moon Hye-ryan, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In India, 41 Canadian diplomats have left the country amid a row over the killing of a Canadian Sikh separatist leader. According to Canada's foreign minister on Thursday, 21 diplomats remain in India. It comes 2 weeks after India asked Canada to withdraw diplomatic staff and threatened that New Delhi would remove the diplomatic immunity of selected envoys if they failed to comply. Canada has called the threat a violation of international law. Tensions between the countries have been high since Canada accused India last month of being involved in the fatal shooting of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada in June this year. It cited credible evidence based on Canadian intelligence. India has denied the allegations and called them absurd. The European Union on Thursday awarded Mahsa Amini its top human rights prize. The 22-year-old died after being detained by Iran's morality police over the country's strict hijab rule for women. Her death triggered nationwide protests that led to hundreds of deaths and many more arrests. Called the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought, the annual prize is given to individuals or groups who have dedicated their lives to the defense of human rights. The prize was also given to the Iranian Women Life Freedom Global Movement, which began after Amini's death. It aims to end Iran's imposition of headscarves on all women and other discriminatory laws. In Spain, around 400 animals have been saved from an international illegal trafficking network. Spanish police on Wednesday said the animals, mostly dogs and cats, were rescued last month as part of a special operation. 13 suspects were arrested. The operation goes as far back as 2020, when authorities received complaints of unsanitary conditions at a pet shop in Barcelona. Their investigation found suspicious paperwork that helped to uncover the illegal ring. It was active across Barcelona, Madrid, Andorra, and Eastern Europe. The police operation comes a month after Spain brought in a new animal welfare law that bans the buying of certain pets in stores or online. The suspects face several charges, including animal abuse, fraud, and document forgery. And finally, police in the Polish capital of Warsaw have arrested a man accused of pretending to be a display mannequin in order to commit burglary. Footage of the 22-year-old man shows him standing still and holding a bag in a store window until closing time. He then allegedly tried to steal jewelry before being spotted by security guards. He has also been accused of burglary at 2 other malls. In one case, he allegedly had a meal at a restaurant around closing time and then entered a store to steal clothes. In the other case, he waited until after closing time at another store and took money from several cash registers. The man faces a potential sentence of up to 10 years in prison. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. The fine autumn season is in full swing in Korea. There are many places you can go for autumn trips to enjoy nature's beauty. And remember, the end of October to early November is peak autumn color season here in Korea. About today's weather, rain in certain parts of the country has let up and sunshine has returned. But that rain has brought chillier air to the country. Highs should be 3 to 7 degrees, lower than yesterday afternoon. Seoul only getting up to about 14 degrees Celsius. Most places, in fact, staying in the teens all day. Daegu and Gwangju see highs of 17 degrees Celsius. But, it's a pleasant day for outdoor activities under bright skies with decent air quality. And many will hit the road for leaf peeping this weekend. Thankfully, skies will remain sunny, but there will be a huge drop in morning temperatures. Seoul will wake up to just 5 degrees Celsius on Saturday, Chuncheon at 2 degrees. Don't forget to pack extra layers. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, and that ends this edition of the Daily Report. Coming up next is our daily panel session, this time on the beauty of Korea's traditional attire, Hanbok. Do stay with us.
Hi, I'm Dan. Hi, I'm Joel. And we're about to get on the KTX to go to Busan. Oh my goodness, wow.
살아있네. 아. 비싼 곱창. 와우. That's the best.
Have to try it while we're here.
It's like we're in a different world, like coming from Seoul.
Ireland, like Korea, is a very outward-facing country. Our peoples are curious about the world. Like Irish people, it matters to Koreans that your story is told well, that people understand your values, your culture, your perspectives. Arirang plays a really important role in telling Korea's story to the world and to promoting the Korean brand. This fosters closer friendships between Korea and other countries and enables better cooperation. Resonating with the world, Arirang.
We ask global leaders, what fuels your passion? How did you develop the courage to take that leap? What would you say to those who look up to you, the globalists? For those who dream of the world stage, the globalists will share their stories. You're watching the globalists. You're watching Arirang.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
On Issues and Insiders today, we meet with the PAV's special Hanbok aficionados who are seeking to share the beauty of Korea's traditional attire beyond our national borders.
Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Come October 21st, that is this coming Saturday, we celebrate Hanbok Day. And in light of this occasion, I have the pleasure of speaking to a special pair of Hanbok enthusiasts, if I may, who are working to promote Hanbok beyond Korea's borders. For more on this, I have Miranda Day live on the line. Miranda, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Jeff Van Dam with us. Jeff, it's great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me as well.
Right, Miranda, first then, let's begin with your very first encounter with Hanbok. When was it, and what was it about this traditional Korean attire that caught your attention?
Yeah, of course. So it was 11 years ago. I was a costume student, and part of our graduating course, we had to create a male and female garment of our choosing. And I knew I wanted to do something different. I didn't know anything about Korean culture at the time, and I was invited along to a film festival. And I now know it was a Korean historical film. I didn't at the time, but I remember when the Hanboks first came onto the screen, they were so beautiful. They were the royal court attire, the bright colours, the gold embellishments on them, and the silhouette. It just caught my eye, and I fell in love instantly. So I spent the rest of the movie on my phone in the dark trying to figure out what it was. I then learned it was called Hanbok. So I did a lot of research, and I chose that to be my final graduating costume piece, and I made the traditional wedding attire. And that was my first Hanbok I ever made, and it's been a passion of mine ever since.
Right, and Miranda, before we delve further into your passion, Jeff, how did you come across Hanbok?
I myself am a Korean adoptee, so learning more about my Korean heritage has always been something that has been in my life, so I knew generally there were traditional Korean clothes. It wasn't until later when I was learning how to make my own clothes to avoid fast fashion that I had to think to myself, well, I'm Korean. What did Korean people wear? So that interest turned into a really slippery slope of Korean history, Korean culture, slowly regaining language skills. But it really became an all-encompassing practice beyond hobby, eventually becoming more into the Sangwal Hanbok making living lifestyle.
Which basically means you practice the wearing of Hanbok and life of Hanbok in your daily life as well then?
Yes, I do.
Right. Miranda, as you mentioned earlier, you put your interest in Hanbok into action, so to speak, by pursuing a career of Hanbok design. Could you, Miranda, walk us through your journey?
Yeah, of course. So after I finished my studies as a costume student, I knew I wanted to learn more about Hanbok, but I came across the language barrier, and so I thought it was really important to learn Korean language. So I enrolled myself into Monash University to do an undergraduate in Korean language. And through that, I had the opportunity to go study in Korea as well at Yonsei University and do an exchange. And during my time studying Korean language, I was introduced to another Hanbok designer called Sunok Yang, and she took me under her wing and taught me everything she knew about Hanbok, taught me how, the culture behind it, the fabrics, the textiles, and the techniques to make them. And it was an amazing opportunity and thing she did for me. And so between that and during my time in Korea, I did lots of classes and workshops, learning how to make it. And then eventually I just started getting a lot of interest from people in Australia, Koreans and Australians themselves wanting to hire and buy Hanbok. So I started the service where I could help provide that and provide a cultural experience for them outside of Korea here in Australia.
And Miranda, what has been the response to your career choice within those inside the industry itself?
Sure. Overall, it's been really positive. I think in Melbourne especially, we're a really multicultural and diverse community here. We really like to promote and celebrate culture. And I think it's, I've been really lucky to have that opportunity to be in a community that are really open to sharing their culture, and I've been really thankful for that. Many Koreans have helped me in my journey along the way, teaching me all sorts of aspects of Korean culture to help me better understand, what I'm doing and how I can do that in a really positive manner to just help share Korean culture.
Meanwhile, Jeff, I understand that your interest in Hanbok has prompted you to adorn it in your daily life there in New York. How did this endeavor begin, and how do you go about seeking to maintain it?
Like I said, as a Korean adoptee and sort of a fast fashion avoider, make your own clothes type of person, it was a bit by bit. I bought a used Hanbok, and trying that on for the first time as someone who missed like Dol or Lunar New Year festivities growing up in a Korean household, that I knew it was something I wanted to have and wanted to try, but that first try on really just started the fire for it. So diving deep into the research, not unaware of who could wear, what times they could wear, during what reign, and different laws of appropriate, and considering all of history around the formation of what we know as Hanbok today, I have now sort of solidified in somewhere between 16th, 18th century pattern, but in Western fabrics I buy here in New York. And this is an everyday. You will not find Western clothing in my wardrobe anymore. And it's just been a deeper dive into my Korean heritage that I've always wanted.
And Jeff, what has been the response from those around you to you wearing hanbok on a daily basis?
I mean, it is, as a Korean in full Joseon dress in the West, there are, people who will voice their confusion verbally, so I cannot say it is all smiles and rainbows all the time, but generally I find and if I can inspire others to be prideful in their own cultures, if they are Korean, that, maybe not like this, but having pride in our culture isn't and should not just be relegated to Lunar New Year or a birthday or such, that we can show our pride in our culture year-round, no matter what.
Right, indeed. Jeff, some say that you are what you wear. That being said, do you find yourself perhaps behaving differently once you're adorned in hanbok?
I mean, now, since it's been like years of every day, all day, my pajamas are hanbok, like everything is hanbok. I consider myself the same person, but I think there's learned behavior in how the world around me treats me as someone so visibly Korean, where I hold myself a little differently, or maybe aware, but I mean, I'm still on my phone waiting for the subway. I still go to work and stop in the drugstore and go shopping at the grocery store, but just in layers of silk.
And staying with that, I love hanbok myself as well, of course, but I can't see myself wearing this every day to work. I mean, commuting back and forth. Is it not uncomfortable? Is it okay now?
Oh, my body's so used to it. And the one thing about our ancestors, they knew exactly what historical layering is. Wearing the appropriate underlayers makes it actually quite bearable. Have a summer wardrobe of linens and like moshirami and such, but winter we go back to silks. So following the traditional sort of dressing patterns, it's actually not too bad of an issue.
Right, I see. Miranda, then, speaking within your capacity as a hanbok designer, what do you propose perhaps to encourage more Koreans themselves to adorn hanbok?
Yeah, I honestly, in the last few years, I think more and more Koreans are starting to wear hanbok. There's many modern and contemporary hanbok designers within Korea and outside now as well, who are creating more wearable day-to-day hanbok that, if they're not as comfortable like Jeff wearing the full traditional hanbok, they can wear smaller pieces. So maybe mixing and matching like a traditional top with, some jeans or pants, or a traditional skirt with a modern blouse, but there's also other ways to bring in elements of traditional Korean handicrafts and accessories as well, I think, into your outfits, like wearing a norage, or even the traditional Korean fabrics themselves are so beautiful and really unique to Korea, and I'm seeing more and more people incorporating them into modern clothing, and I think it's another way that people have been able to, share Korean culture through the fashion and textiles. And I think it's a good way to branch Koreans or other people into Hanbok and Korean textiles, and then slowly work their way up to wearing more traditional clothing like Jeff.
Right, and like Miranda said, talking about sharing of Korean culture, Jeff, not only does Korea celebrate Hanbok Day, which falls on October 21st, as I mentioned earlier, I believe 3 states that in the U.S. also celebrate Hanbok Day, including California, Arizona, and New Jersey. What, Jeff, are perhaps the broader implications of this particular reality, do you think?
I think some of the broader implications are a very high up, well displayed sign of acceptance of the Korean people, Korean culture, our contributions to the fabric of the United States. There is also a Korean American Day on January 13th. So I don't think the U.S. has ever, shied away from acknowledging appropriately certain holidays for our culture. And I think it's just, like I said, a really good sign that we are welcome, that people have a genuine curiosity and thirst to know more about Korean culture and all its facets. But it's wonderful that Hanbok specifically has been officially recognized in so many places.
Miranda, what would you say, staying on with what Jeff just mentioned, would you say that what has been the impact of Hallyu itself on Australia's interest in Korea's broader culture, including, of course, Hanbok?
Yeah, it's blown up in Australia. When I first started this journey 11 years ago, we really had only just started learning about Korean culture here in Melbourne. We were the first year or two of cultural festivals, but especially in the past 5 years alone, Hallyu has just brought so much Korean culture to Melbourne. It's been amazing. So many young people as well have become really interested, whether it's through food, music, fashion. I think once they dip their toes into learning about Korean culture, they then become interested in other aspects like Hanbok, and it's been amazing, just how many people now are interested in learning about it. We had our first Korean Cultural Festival earlier this year after COVID for 3 years, I think it was, and it was just an amazing turnout to what we've had before that, and I think that is all thanks to, the Hallyu and Korean wave that's come across Korea and the world. It's incredible.
Jeff, Miranda just mentioned COVID. I understand that it was during the pandemic that you secured quite a bit of following online. Could you tell us a bit about that, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I'm a Korean adoptee. So during lockdown, trying to find community, not only as a Korean adoptee, but within the Korean American diaspora, I started being a little bolder with social media within the historical dress, historical fashion. Some may say this is vintage fashion to some Koreans, but I've just been very fortunate to have been welcomed and for there to be such a thirst for knowledge about Korean dress history. I think one of my champion moments or my causes is to, at least in the West, to not use the word costume necessarily, where this is clothing, garments, but the connotation of costume, especially around Halloween, that our culture is not necessarily a costume. But if I can put out more, as well as for Korean adoptees, where we've always had a bit of a struggle allowing ourselves, being allowed to see ourselves as Korean, that we don't necessarily need permission from anybody, that we are Korean and we are enough, and there is no one to stop us from claiming our identity. If this Korean adoptee can do this, then why can't anyone do otherwise?
Right, of course, Jeff, of course. Miranda, earlier we spoke about the growing interest in Korean culture there in Australia. That being said, would you say the resources available there in Australia meets the growing interest in Korean culture, or there's more need to be done?
I think there's always more that can be done. I think the Korean government is doing amazing effort at the moment to promote Hanbok and really be able to put the resources out there. There's a lot of amazing organisations both in Korea and in Australia who are really working hard to put more resources out there, including myself. I started this business as a way to have a place people can come to learn and share. We run workshops and classes with these organisations and community groups to help have a place for people to come and learn. And I really hope we can continue doing that. But I always think there's more we can always do, but I think we're on the right track in getting there.
Miranda, with regard to the making of Hanbok, what would you say is one of the most challenging aspects of that endeavour?
For me, it's a passion project. I don't see it as a challenge, or more of a fun challenge, I guess. I think there's so many different historical sides to Hanbok that I've still got a lot to learn, a long way to go. But I very much enjoy the challenge of going through it and learning all the different parts behind making it, as well as like the cultural significance as well. So I think I'm constantly learning about Hanbok, and I hope that never stops.
Right, neither do I. Jeff, I extend the same question to you. What would you say, technically speaking, is one challenge of designing your own Hanbok there in New York?
I think, well, currently, having solidified sort of my classic silhouette of choice, now it's trying to find things that fit. But I do think the challenge now is, how do I stay respectful to what I want to stay respectful, what I want to stay traditional, but in what ways do I change, what out of necessity, out of everyday life and wear and tear, or just out of trying a new technique or style. So sort of going through the library of options within every make is the technical challenge of creating something a little different.
Right. And what can you tell us a bit about your future plans with regard to better promoting Hanbok, Jeff?
I mean, what Hanbok gives me in my journey of identity and birth search and reclaiming my culture, I have never felt more grounded or more proud of who I am and where I come from. I feel that if I can do what I've been doing and speak to my adoptee brothers and sisters and siblings internationally upon our right to our Koreanness, as well as educate those who have a genuine knowledge to know about Korean clothing and garment history and culture respectfully, that instead of saying shrouded in mystery and only in K-dramas and, you know, some historical photo, that it is still alive, that the knowledge is there, that we can continue to educate and add to this beautiful historic tapestry.
Right, of course. And Miranda, what do you propose to better support others who may be hoping to chart a career, a path that is into Hanbok design as yourself?
Yeah, so as I said before, you know, we've been running workshops and classes for those who are interested. But I want people to know, you know, whether they're in Australia or not, if they do have genuine interest and want to reach out, you know, I'm here to talk about it. I'm open to pass on everything I've learned. You know, people took the time to teach me, and I would like to further teach them. But there's so many resources available now, especially on the internet, that, you know, people don't need to be afraid to reach out. You know, everyone is here to teach and learn and kind of keep the cycle going. So I hope that we can continue being a place of knowledge and, you know, a resource for people who are wanting to learn like myself.
Right, and a place of sharing of culture, of course. Miranda, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Jeff, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you for having us.
Right, well, on that note, we end this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
Arirang TV is conducting a quality and satisfaction evaluation to enhance the broadcast service for viewers worldwide. Please visit our website at www.arirang.com to provide your honest opinions. Participants will be entered into a draw for a